This is the CHGO Cubs Podcast. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan, and we are coming to you on Sunday, July 21st. And Brendan, we come out of the All-Star break. It looked as if the Cubs were going to come out with quite a whimper. They managed to steal one on Sunday in walk fashion to avoid the sweep. Brendan, plenty to talk about, but narrowly just a disaster of a way to come out the break. Still not good, dropping 2 or 3 at home, but a better note to end on Sunday at the very least.
All the offensive concerns that we had talked about prior to that stretch before the All-Star break looked like they resurfaced, unfortunately. Yes, they won. Yes, they salvaged a series and avoided a sweep, but many of the same questions we've been asked and talked through for the past 2 months are still here, Corey.
Yeah, so the Cubs score 4 runs all weekend. Credit to the Diamondbacks pitching. You saw a couple good pitchers in there in Zach Gallen and Brandon Pfaadt. Obviously tip your cap to good pitchers, but 4 runs all weekend. And prior to that 9th inning on Sunday, when they tie the game, Brendan, they hadn't scored since the 8th inning on Friday. It was not good. Again, you salvage one. Hey, taking 1 of 3 is better than getting swept. But initially, even watching them win on Sunday, the problem still remains, Brendan, and it was something that we talked about a lot. You were at home, coming out of the break, riding some good momentum. You had a 5-2 stretch before that. You swept the Orioles. We talked about all that. And once again, you dropped a series to a team that is in front of you in this race. I think I read something the other day that because of the head-to-head matchups, the Cubs, everybody that was in that NL wildcard race, the Cubs have the tiebreaker with none of them because they don't beat them.
It's almost moot talking about playoffs right now. I feel as if playoffs are, of course, in front of us, but the last thing on my mind when the team looks this anemic offensively. The game on Sunday before the 9th inning, and even still throughout those innings, I mean, so frustrating. Even the game on Saturday against Gallen, they force deep counts, they force 6 walks and no runs. It's that lack of slug that we've just succumbed to now for multiple seasons that I'm desperately hoping at some point in the near future we see a return. It's just so exhausting watching this offense game in, game out, stringing together base hits and not get that 3rd or 4th base hit in an inning, in contrast to not seeing any slug whatsoever. I need the slug. I'm sick of talking about this offense without the slug.
Well, and, we were texting as this game was finishing, and, the only saving grace there, and, of course, he gets walked, but Nico was going to win that game. I was pretty confident in that. Yeah. Anybody else, and they're loading the bases with no outs after the Amaya bunt that, they can't turn into an out, they're not scoring. I'm sure of it. But Nico, he's too quality a hitter. All he needs to do is put the ball in play, or in this case, take a walk. I trusted Nico Horner. But yeah, I mean, look, we end up in a very similar spot to kind of how we left things when you and I last spoke before the All-Star break, in that you are a handful of games out. You've got, 3 series here before the trade deadline, and questions abound. And, I think the general stance remains the same for me, and I think you, Brendan. This team is clearly, when you and I wrapped things up, kind of talking about the first half when we headed into the All-Star break, the general consensus was disappointing, underachieving, too high a payroll for, a last place team, et cetera, et cetera. And then just squaring that with, there are 3 games out of a playoff spot. So, let's see how these next few series go, and we'll see how they react accordingly. And I don't think this series changes much, but it was another opportunity to at least gain ground on a team that is in front of you in this race. The Diamondbacks currently I think would be the first team out. They're tied with the Mets, but I believe, at least looking at the standings, the Mets own the tiebreaker. And you came out of the break, you scored 4 runs all weekend, and you lost a game to the Diamondbacks in the standings. That's ultimately what happens. You can kind of spin it whatever way you want, but it was another wasted opportunity. If you were going to make a run, capitalize, come off of that 5-2 stretch, and make this your run here before the deadline, well, this was not the start that you were looking for, despite stealing one on Sunday.
So I'm just reading Twitter right now. I'm sure we'll see maybe some audio or video of this, but apparently Craig Counsell got irritated at Jesse Rogers. ESPN.
Okay. Do we know for what?
We don't know. But hey, if you want life or want some energy or some excitement, maybe Craig Counsell kind of lost it a little bit. We'll see. Stay tuned for that. But I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Even Craig is growing wary of the offense.
John in our YouTube chat, John Bones, has just watched the post-game presser with Craig. He nearly tore Jesse Rogers' head off for asking about Morel swinging for the fences in the 6th or 7th.
Let's see what that was.
So we'll keep an eye, see if some quotes pop up. Obviously, I can't watch that while we're live on the air, but paying attention to it.
Would you rather watch me or watch Craig Counsell go off on Jesse Rogers? You can be honest. I know what your answer is. I'm throwing you a
listen. I think I've said this before. Like my parents taught me, if I don't have nice things to say, just don't say anything.
Well, look at you.
What I will say
guy.
What I will say to everybody on this particular issue is, I believe my opinions on one Jesse Rogers are well documented historically. If you want to find them, I'll leave it at that. So.
I'm not touching this.
Good for Craig.
I'm not touching that. Anyway.
Yeah. So I don't know, Brendan. I again, obviously, you rather they steal the game and not get swept here over the weekend. But very hard not to be just disappointed in that offense. And I know, friend of the podcast, Michael Cerami, had tweeted something to the effect of, "You've got 7 innings, 10 plus strikeouts from your starter on Sunday, and you're losing." And again, they get Shota off the hook for the loss, but a familiar theme we've seen throughout this season. Starting pitching, really good. Even Kyle Hendricks on Saturday was perfectly fine for what you're asking of him at this point. Justin Steele singled to death on Friday, but even in that start, like, these were all still winnable starts, even if the ones from Kyle and Justin weren't the best that we've seen from them. And then Shota goes out and does what he's been doing, continuing his business. He's a stud, and you're lucky to win a game. It's, we're back to the offense that we saw for so much of this season. And I think kind of a common theme is, we've seen since the start of the season, since that 17-8 start or whatever it was, just not being able to capitalize on some of these good little stretches. Like, we saw the 5-2 stretch, and you kind of go, okay, turn it into a thing, play a good month of baseball, and it just doesn't happen. They just, come out, they have that opportunity, and it's a flat weekend against an NL wildcard contender.
We're seeing a lot of the same issues. The lack of capitalizing on the momentum is a result of having a variable offense. Morel is getting a lot of chatter in the chat over here. Jesse Rogers is saying that Morel was swinging for the lake on Sunday in the 6th or 7th inning. It's those types of performances that are causing that lack of capitalizing on momentum. These guys are still developing. The risk, as you and I talked about, was trying to ensure that the Cubs are competitive while they're developing. But we're seeing issues still persist. Morel at third base, the offensive funk we're seeing, the questions of whether he should still remain at third base going through this funk or give Mastroboni more opportunities is something that's being talked about. Even seeing Ballesteros slug in AAA and questions about calling him up have percolated through the fan base and maybe taking away at bats from some current guys on the team. All in all, the fan base is yearning for offense, dude. And I'm right there with them. It's exhausting. It's almost, when I hear you talk about this team, it's almost like going over my head, because this is always going to continue unless a change in personnel happens or extreme development happens. But we've waited now for 3 months this season to see some of that extreme development, and it's just not happening. So, of course, we have fans who are asking the question of what can be done now? How can you spark this team for a playoff run if you're still looking at the playoffs, which they are still in the picture, but also what can be done to find out what you need to address in the offseason and more immediately in trade possibilities at the deadline. Fans are wanting to move on and start that cycle for next season.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does set up the rest of this stretch as you finish out July here. Obviously, you have the Brewers coming to town on Monday night. So that is the next series, 3 with the Brewers. Then you're off on Thursday. Then you've got 3 with the Royals, who have played good baseball, and 3 with the Reds, who are, as we keep talking about, another team that is in front of you and that you haven't been able to take advantage of. So it sets up something that we've seen in years past, Brendan, where you kind of put things on having to be able to beat the Milwaukee Brewers, and that's not really something that you've shown much consistency in being able to do over the years. So this is obviously a good Brewers team that's coming in, and you're going to have to turn things around pretty quick, because you can't just keep dropping these series. Obviously, I think at this point, nobody's looking at chasing the Milwaukee Brewers, but you have to be able to take care of business against these teams and on a homestand before you have those last 2 series to finish off July that are on the road against 2 teams that are, in races themselves. So not going to be easy sledding here in these next 3 series for the Cubs.
Yeah, baseball is always stupid. So you never know. You never know which guys start to emerge, but we are 10 days away from the trade deadline. We heard reports this week the Cubs could be open to trading even some guys extended. Jameson Taillon, for example, was a name that was brought up as one guy that the Cubs could be listening to in trade possibilities. By the time we talk next, we'll have an idea of how realistic those trade possibilities are. By this time next week, we should be able to know if this team is bona fide sellers or buyers. At this time last year, the Cubs proceeded to win 10 of their next 11 games, exactly at this time last year. So unless a similar crazy outcome happens, we're going to be talking about this team more than likely in a selling type situation, unless they go off this week. And even if they are within maybe 4 or 5 games of a wild card, I think there's still a possibility they may soft sell and may not forego the season, but not necessarily attempt to salvage what's been a disappointing season.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about that. I do want to talk about, I know there was some discussion of like Jameson Taillon as someone who maybe could be on the market. And I think, looking into what, and I think that pairs with a good conversation because, right, I see Edward in our YouTube chat, sell what? Like what are their things to sell? And I think Taillon represents a good kind of conversation on that because unlike last year, you don't have guys on an immediately expiring contracts where you have that like key decision of do we not take what we can get for them and try to make the playoffs here? Are we passing up an opportunity to, get more prospects to add to this pipeline, et cetera, et cetera? Taillon is one of those where it's kind of looking ahead if you were to entertain that and kind of the debate of pretty fair contract. He's been good for you. You need starting pitching, but is there a better way to potentially allocate that money in years forward? So it's not necessarily a sell in terms of like just gutting the roster and let's get rid of everybody, but kind of what I think a lot of us expect at this deadline, really maybe no matter how they play over these next few weeks, where it's kind of just like moving some things around and thinking like, okay, this group is expensive, not good enough. What can we do now to put ourselves in a better position for the 2025 offseason, the 2025 regular season, and how can we kind of look at the players that are available now and make those moves versus just strict, we're buying only for 2024 or we're selling only for 2024. I think it's going to end up somewhere in the middle. So we'll talk about that. Want to talk about Shota, Justin Steele, Kyle Hendricks, the starters from this weekend. And we can talk about the Morel stuff as well. I see that popping up. Obviously, Craig Counsell is yelling at Jesse Rogers, so we can talk about that as well. But we will do so after we come back from our first ad break here.
Games will strive to be a -110 split on the Circa Sportsbook menu, unlike other sportsbooks, which may use -115 or -120 splits. Circa Sports keeps as little money as possible on large market bets, especially compared to those other books. We encourage bettors to download and explore all sports betting apps available to compare Circa Sportsbook. I personally love Circa Sportsbook because there are real people behind their brand who resolve issues in a timely fashion, unlike other books who use chatbots. All aspects of the app are actually run by the same team that runs the main Circa Sportsbook at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. So download the Circa Sports Illinois app at circasports.com/Illinois-app to sign up today. Also, be on the lookout for Circa events, watch parties, and tailgates. They're with us for all Cubs Friday 120 clubs, Corey. If you or somebody you know may have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, 1-800-426-2537, text GAMB to 833-234, or visit areyoureallywinning.com. You know, it looked like a beautiful day at Wrigley. Honestly, all weekend. Beautiful at Wrigley, beautiful sunsets. I wish I was there enjoying a blue moon, Corey, a crisp blue moon. Some beers can say they're brewed for baseball, but only Blue Moon can say they're brewed by baseball. Beer and baseball just go together, and there's no beer that goes better than the one that was literally born in a ballpark. Blue Moon was created at Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. It's the natural choice for every game all season long. Blue Moon, to me, is the perfect baseball beer, Corey, because it has a refreshing flavor with Valencia orange peel for subtle sweetness and hints of coriander. Blue Moon Belgian-style wheat ale is a one-of-a-kind beer that's made brighter. So bring the ballpark to you with Blue Moon Belgian-style wheat ale. It's one-of-a-kind every time. Get Blue Moon delivered by visiting get.bluemoonbeer.com/CHGO to see your delivery options. That's get.bluemoonbeer.com/CHGO. Blue Moon, made brighter. Celebrate responsibly. Blue Moon Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
All right, Brendan. I did use the time while you were talking about our wonderful sponsors. I know about our wonderful sponsors, Circa and Blue Moon. So I did use the time to listen to Craig Counsell kind of clapping back at Jesse Rogers. I think really simply, like, I think the chat and, you know, maybe some folks are going to turn this into a, well, Morel does do that, or here's how I feel about Morel. The issue watching the video is with a reporter kind of taking a dig at a player, saying, like, talking about situational hitting and saying, well, why was he swinging for the lake? Like, that's not a really, like, appropriate.
So is that what he said?
Yeah. Like,
what does he say? He said, why is Morel swinging for the lake?
I can't see the entire conversation, but they're talking about situational hitting in the seventh inning, and he said Morel's swinging for the lake, and Craig just goes, that's a bad take. Jesse says, what? And he goes, it's a bad take. He's swinging for the lake. Like, come on. It's the phrasing, you know? Yeah. There's a way to ask that question and discuss those things. When you say swinging for the lake, to me, that's just not an appropriate way to ask that question. You're going to get that response from Craig Counsell. He's going to stand up for his players. This is one of those weird things where I feel like we've seen constant discussion of wanting to see more fire from Craig, and like the other day with Morel also not getting ejected when that call was a few inches below the zone. And we've talked about that. We do want to see more fire from that and see more things. We talked about that even before Justin Steele yelled at the dugout and kind of tried to fire them up. It's weird to read that. So now he does stand up for his players, and people are upset at that. I don't know what they want Craig to do, because that's what he's doing here. There is a way to discuss players' approaches and situational hitting. When you say he's swinging for the lake, how do you expect the manager to respond to that?
And, deep down inside, Jesse knows what he's doing. And it draws eyes, it draws emotional responses, and that's the style, and so be it. I personally love Craig Counsell sticking up for his guys. If Craig Counsell feels as if that is room for misinterpretation, leave no room for misinterpretation. I absolutely love Counsell doing that. I want to see the actual video, but it does inspire questions of what is Morel's approach, and those are fair questions. But as you said, there's a way to go about asking those questions, and there is nuance to all of those types of observations and questions being asked. And I think Craig responded appropriately, to be frank.
We've talked about Morel's approach and things going that way. He's not swinging for the lake. That's the thing. Edward said it in our YouTube chat. That's a meatball way of phrasing that. You can discuss a player not coming through situationally and shortening up his swing with 2 strikes, things like that. But when you phrase a question that way, it's a dig at the player. I can't really believe I'm seeing people take that a different way. Like, he's not up there swinging for the lake. That's not what he's trying to do. Him not executing situationally is a different thing. But listen, everybody can interpret things however they want. I am never going to take Jesse's side. So I have long-standing opinions about that, and let's just say I'm blocked on Twitter for a reason. So
it's just an uninteresting question. I mean, that's really what it comes down. If you find interest in having that emotional outburst, so be it. But it doesn't look at the response it got. It doesn't dive into the nuance and the information you want to hear from guys involved. And it's why other outlets are growing, Corey.
Yeah.
So
anyway, and look, by the way, we've talked about this too. Like, you and I discussed, I think it might have been last week, like, Morel's approach has changed in a negative way. We have discussed this. There was a time where he was taking an extreme amount of walks, he was cutting his strikeouts, and he was hitting the ball really hard on a line. That's not really what's happening anymore. Like, the discussion of like, oh, he's unlucky, that was like a month ago. You haven't heard either of us say that. I don't think anybody's really said that. The approach has changed, and not in a good way. And obviously the results have not been there. We just did our, surprises, disappointments, excitements at the All-Star break, and he's certainly one of them. Like, the results have not been what you want them to be. That's what it is. So I do want to talk, Brendan, quickly about, not quickly, so James says, we seem to be more focused on whether a reporter is phrasing things correctly rather than winning and accountability. Well, I mean, we're just talking about this because this came up. I'm not sure who's not accountable for what, I guess. I feel like you and I hold people accountable. I don't know who's not being held accountable or for what. But like I said, people wanted a little more energy from Craig Counsell. You got some of it. I guess him yelling at umpires is different than yelling at a presser. I don't know. I don't know what people want from him. Also, I want to say this too, because I see the discussion about Craig. David Ross definitely got ejected more times, but I need to remind people, like, this was a real thing last year that he never stood up for Seiya Suzuki in particular. You can go through and look through old tweets. If you tweet like Ross, Seiya, things like that, like, there was a whole thing about how he never stood up and got ejected, like when Seiya was getting screwed on all those called strikes. And so it's very weird for me to read, like, Ross would have done this. Ross, like, we were screaming at him to do the same thing at times. It's very weird. Whatever.
I want to scream at in praise for home runs. I'm sick of talking about the whole, they need to show more life and all of this. And I get it. I want to see more life too, but this is stupid. This is a stupid conversation. The team needs to hit more home runs. They need to hit the baseball more. I don't care.
I get
to James's point, I understand what he's trying to say, but I don't care about any of this. Like, entertainment wise, of course you want to see them show more fire, but entertainment wise, I want to see 40 home runs from multiple guys in this lineup. That's what I want to talk about.
Yeah. And I do think ultimately, like, these are all just subjective things. You can feel how about Counsell as you want. You can feel about Morel or guys getting ejected or different things. You can feel however you want. ultimately what it reflects is that this team just isn't good enough. We shouldn't be talking about this. The season is not coming down to whether Craig is getting ejected or not getting ejected or this or this. The lifeless offense is what this is coming down to. If we're discussing these things, it's on the team and they're not not performing adequately, you know? So,
well, I mean, like when there's such lifeless offense, there's a void in discussion, and the void tends to be on stuff that's not really important. So, like, we've talked, I think, a lot actually about whether or not guys should be showing more life and everything, and that is really it has some effect, as we've talked about, but it's generally inconsequential compared to the bigger picture type discussions about third base, first base, development in PCA, Moises Ballesteros, Matt Shaw, maybe in his development at third base. Those are really like the actual consequential questions. Whether or not Craig Counsell should be arguing, which again, I would like to see more of that, really is not that important in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I agree. All right. I do want to talk about Shota Imanaga. Great week, great appearance, 1-2-3 inning in the All-Star game. They announced that the Cubs are going to open next season in Tokyo in an amazing ad with him and Seiya Suzuki that the team with Cubs Productions put out. And Shota came back and responded with yet again another incredible start here on Sunday that once again, as we talk about the offense, the team needed. If he didn't go out and do this, they're losing again because it took them till the 8th and 9th inning to scratch across the 9th inning to scratch across the meager 2 runs that they were able to provide today. But 7 innings, 2 hits, 1 earned, 1 walk, 10 strikeouts, now a 2.86 ERA on the season. And Shota Imanaga is our Illinois Pork Producers power player of the weekend. He provided the power for today's game. Presented by the Illinois Pork Producers. Savor the flavor, savor the gains, and celebrate any occasion by enjoying the best pork produced by Illinois pig farmers. Congrats to Shota Imanaga. That's the best accolade he's earned all week.
You know, it reminded me of another quality lefty, not Justin Steele, but legendary lefty. I can't believe it's taken 30 minutes. I can't believe it's taken 30 minutes to get to this point. John Lester in the booth.
Yeah.
It seemed on brand for the Chicago Cubs to have a lefty performing that well with one of their best lefties of all time in the booth.
So our guy Cody Del Mendo in the chat said he only wished that it was directed at Ryan.
Well, Ryan's a baseball guy.
Ryan wouldn't phrase a question like that.
Yeah,
that's the thing. He wouldn't phrase a question like that. But that would be funny. And all of us like texting like, is he yelling at Ryan? Oh no. But just on Shota, just absolutely incredible. And it does, I like to highlight it especially, we all know he's been really good. He was the Cubs' lone all-star representative. He's been great the entire season. I like to continue to highlight him, one, because this is still his first year doing this at the MLB level. So as we keep turning months in the calendar, Brendan, like we did see some regression a little bit from that stretch where he had a 0.9 ERA to start the season. But for him to be continuing to get these results now as we go deeper and deeper and deeper into the season, doing it against teams like the Orioles, a team like the Diamondbacks, who aren't one of the best offenses in the league, but they do really well against left-handed pitchers. Again, they're ahead of you in this playoff race. It's important to note just how he continues to keep adjusting. The book keeps getting written on him with each start, and he keeps coming back and finding ways to attack, racks up 10 strikeouts on Sunday. And for all of the gambles was, did this work out in the offseason? Did that work out? What did or didn't? Shota looks like an incredible signing and for a value for what they got him on.
Exceeding expectations in the strikeout department, maybe not so much the walk department, but going through today's game, 9.4 K per 9, 1.5 base on balls per 9, whiff rate of over 25%. That's above average by about 1 percentage point. That to me is the biggest surprise. The question with him was, can the fastball play up? And is the splitter good enough to miss bats? Both of those questions have been answered with a resounding yes. And you're seeing weak contact and you're seeing more whiffs than expected. Having a K per nine that's almost 9 times your walk per nine rate is going to play. I guess it's really 6 times if I'm doing the math correctly, but you get what I'm trying to say. Those two traits are likely going to continue unless something weird happens, unless he fatigues and the command starts to deteriorate, or if there's a rapid change in scouting against Shota. But the book is already out. He's had 18 starts. He throws fastballs up, splitters that just dive down, and occasionally shows a sweepy pitch to left-handed batters. So I'm not sure if this is really going to change in a reversion type way anytime soon when the stuff is looking this good, the command's looking this good, and it's been 18 starts now.
Yeah.
All right, let me hit our second ad break here and we'll turn it back around.
Sounds good.
What is Sunnyside, Corey? Sunnyside is your home for judgment-free cannabis shopping, a place where all kinds of visitors are welcome to explore, discover, and purchase a wide array of high-quality products. Sunnyside has everything you need to elevate your summer. What are some of the amazing features, you might ask? Well, it's a one-stop shop for all your cannabis needs. Sunnyside has expertly curated menu items with over 100 strains to choose from, plus easy online ordering and in-store pickup. Sunnyside is Illinois' favorite dispensary for a reason, with locations in the city such as Wrigleyville or River North to the suburbs in Champaign, South Beloit, and more. And if you're starting out, Sunnyside has expert guidance and brands we know you'll love, like Good News and Mindy's. It's easy to order online, and they are there to help in store if you need assistance. Here for the summer is Good News Tea Time Disposable Vape, bringing classic lemonade flavor that's perfect for the golf course because we all need a little help staying loose on the green. So visit sunnyside.shop for bright buys every day, including 50% off your first 3 online purchases. Enter promo code HICHGO at checkout to qualify. Exclusions do apply. Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary, bright buys every day, is only for 21 and over or Illinois medical card holders. Make Ray Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram your number 1 draft pick this summer to find the perfect new car for you this July. Shop a wider selection of vehicles at Ray CDJR and score new lower prices across their huge inventory during the Make This Summer event. For a limited time, lease the new 2024 Jeep Compass Latitude Luxe for only $189 a month, or shop over 125 vehicles priced under $20,000. Let the amazing team also at Ray CDJR help you land the perfect vehicle at the perfect price, because with Ray's price promise, the numbers you're hearing now are the same prices you can expect to shop in-store and online. That's because Ray's price promise means no price changing and no add-ons and no hidden fees. Since they prioritize affordability for the customers, hurry into Ray CDJR and shop one of Chicago's area's largest inventories, then drive home with more money in your pocket than you'd expect. So if you're in the market for a new vehicle, you have to check out the team at Ray Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram, because they are the only team we recommend. Visit them today on Route 12 in Fox Lake. And for more information, visit Ray CDJR in Fox Lake or raycdjr.com, serving the community since 1963.
All right, guys. Back to it. Let's talk about the Cubs. So John Lester is going to do the full broadcast, I believe, on Monday night. He was only in there for a little bit on Sunday. Unfortunately, we couldn't just get him and Pat. We have to get the, third man, but we'll leave that there too. Loved hearing John in the marquee booth.
Really?
He had some really good stuff. Yeah. With, I think, Cliff Lloyd and Cole over the weekend, just talking about umpires not facing like repercussions for bad calls, things like that. And I liked his analysis in the booth, just talking about, feel for pitches and knowing when to put guys away and, working with the catcher to figure out how to get guys out. It's always cool to hear those insights. I did get the feeling that, he was like, man, I could have been in a deer stand this weekend. Like, why did I agree to this? What I do love, Brendan, though, is that when we saw the shots of him arriving to beautiful historic historic Wrigley Field, I believe on Friday, ahead of this weekend of work that he was doing, wearing a nice blue suit, a little big, if I'm being honest with you, but he can do whatever he wants. The main takeaway, though, being that he's strolling up, he's got his iced coffee in one hand, his suit, and just the bling on his other hand, his 2016 Chicago Cubs World Series ring.
Why does he have that ring?
He won it. Look, the jersey's right
what?
there. Yeah, with the Cubs.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. World Series champions, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
So that was great. I mean, it's kind of fan service to me directly, but like John Lester, Pat Hughes, Sunday, it's like 80 degrees, beautiful. That was great vibes. Unfortunately, couldn't take 2 or 3 or sweep the series here with the Diamondbacks, but they steal the one. So
I mean, you're missing the 2 other items. He has a W pin on his suit and a Gucci belt.
Yeah, love it.
I mean, what a fit all around. The jewelry, the belt, the sunglasses, the suit. Gotta love it.
Yeah. You want to talk about the Tyone thing? Let's talk about that. I feel like it's an interesting enough discussion. So I think there was just some rumors that, they'd be open to it, or it's, if teams are calling, they're, not being told that he's off limits.
It was from Bruce
cetera.
Levine from The Score reported that. Yep.
So looking at the contract, obviously it's 4 years. We're in year 2 of that. Average annual value, $17 million, 68 total. So if you traded him, you'd have 2 years full of that contract. It's an interesting discussion, Brendan, because obviously he's been good for you outside of the disaster start to his contract. When he came back in the second half of last year, he was really good. And for you this year, he's been great. 3.1 ERA, 3.81 FIP, and 7-4. If you're looking at that, I only mentioned that because the team lost his first 12 starts or whatever it was last year. Yeah. He's been good for you. Veteran, guy that can go out there, give you innings. Obviously started the year with an injury, but he's a reliable guy. He will be 33 in November of this year. So you'd have 2 years left, 33-year-old. I think for me, as you and I have discussed, pretty much anybody is on the table. If people want to call, take the call and see what they're offering. You and I kind of offered our opinion on some of the, I don't think there's rumors, but people were asking about Justin Steele, and you and I provided a hard no to any of that, simply just because he's a top of the rotation guy, cost controlled, young. What are you going to get that's better than that? And then you don't have a top of the rotation starter. It really doesn't make any sense. Like, to me, it's a non-starter to even discuss. Tyone, though, teams need pitching, man, and he's a veteran. If the Cubs were willing to pay down the rest of this year, it's a pretty safe contract for another team. It's not a lot of money for a couple years remaining. He'd look awfully good to teams that are desperate for starting pitching, especially if the Cubs are just willing to pay the rest of the salary this year, and you're getting him for free. I don't know. To me, this wouldn't be something where it's necessarily about what are you getting for Tyone. It's about, do you need that money in the next offseason and following years? And again, it's not a huge contract. It's not the type of contract that is like hampering them from doing anything. But when we look at this roster and you're pushing up against the luxury tax and you're battling for last place at the moment, you start to look and say, okay, well, we do have a handful of $15 to $25 million contracts. Do we need to move some of them? Is this money better allocated elsewhere? And you look at the way that the Cubs have been able to get production from some of these guys. Obviously, you've dealt with a ton of injuries, but Javier Assad, really good for you. Jordan Wicks was good for you when he was out there. Ben Brown was showing a lot of signs, and you don't know how these injuries are going to go, but perhaps you're confident in your ability to find people to fill the rotation. Do you need that money for offense, bullpen, etc.? Maybe that's a fair question to ask.
The question for me is, do the Cubs want to accept more variance, higher ceilings, or are they complacent, not in a bad way, but complacent with who Tyone is, which right now is a borderline league average starter for $17 million per year, whose ceiling may not be high. And as we know, probably is not high. That's the question they have to address. We have some history with this. The history is Stroman versus Shota. The Cubs opted to not go with Stroman on a shorter contract for $20 million. They opted for the more variable guy in Shota, someone who doesn't have the consistency and the track record that Stroman had, but had a higher ceiling. So far, that has paid off, and they paid Shota a little bit less money than Stroman ultimately got from the Yankees. I think there's a legitimate argument to be had that if trading Taillon lets them get more variance and higher ceiling guys for the $17 million, then it should be seriously considered. The caveat is the Cubs pitching, even this season and going forward, there's uncertainty. You may want to have, even though it's league average, a consistent, stable pitcher. But at the same time, Taillon's limitations are, well, he's getting older. He'll be 33 years old next season. He's someone who gets his outs by weak contact. His contact rate this year is in the 10th percentile, heavy contact, almost like Kyle Hendricks. He also has a history of injuries, back injuries, the most recent ones. His range of innings is between 140 innings to 170 innings. Those are the limitations for $17 million. Some teams may want to pay for that. They may want to pay for a 140 to 170 innings range with an ERA around 4 to 4.2, maybe 4.5. But as you mentioned, and as we know, the Cubs have a ton of 15 to $25 million contract spread throughout the entire team with a smaller ceiling right now. The smaller ceiling because now you know more information about these guys. And Taillon's ceiling, I think, is smaller than what it was entering 2023 because we have a year and a half and the sweeper has been successful, but we're seeing diminishing fastball results and we're seeing diminishing results across the board in terms of his whiffs that reduce his ceiling. I think it makes sense to consider a trade. I'm not saying do it, but I think there is a realistic possibility it happens.
Yeah, and I think it reflects kind of what we were talking about when we introduced this topic was it reflects kind of what I would expect their strategy at the deadline to be. Now, obviously, all of this can change kind of on a dime. And I know that people yell at me when I say this, but like if they swept the Brewers and then the Royals, or if they lost all of those games, obviously right now they're in this weird spot where you can look at the standings and say, this team has stunk for 2.5 months. I don't care that they're right at the heels of the wild card race. Who cares? You could also look at that and say, well, if they play good baseball all of a sudden, which they haven't really proven they can do consistently at all, they could be a playoff team. And I'll take that. And who cares if it's a low percentage chance? You can look at that however you want. At the moment, I can't tell you how Jed Hoyer, Carter Hawkins, Crane Kenny, Tom Ricketts are going to look at that. I have no idea. So either way, I kind of expect soft in either direction. And like I said, I think it's less about immediate needs for this team and more so how do we position ourselves to be in a better place for this coming off season, to spend money, to have roster flexibility, whatever that may need to look like, and years beyond. And you can do these things. You can get, similarly, if you were a team trading for Jameson Taillon, you wouldn't be getting him for just 3 months. You'd be getting a starter you can slot into your rotation for, what did I say, $17 million for the next 2 years. And a guy that maybe can reliably give you 25, 30 starts or whatever it is.
It depends on the context of the team. If the team has flexibility and they're willing to accept some of the lower ceiling, then Taillon's a fit. On the Cubs, is he a fit right now? Well, it remains to be seen how they fill the other puzzle pieces, right? And right now you can see some reason to not get rid of him, but exchange value in a way to make the other pieces to the puzzle fit better. It just depends on what that puzzle actually is, which a lot could happen in the next 2 weeks at this deadline.
Yeah. But that would be my focus for me. And even when we're talking about trading someone like Taillon or whatever moves they're going to make, like the Cubs have a very healthy farm system. We've talked, they don't necessarily have the Chris Bryant, the kind of guy that's just guaranteed to go and win all these awards and help you win a World Series like Chris Bryant did with his teammate John Lester.
Yeah, on the Cubs.
Yes, but you have a lot of good prospects, a lot of healthy prospects at really every level. So my concern is not getting more of those guys. What the Cubs don't need is more 18, 19-year-old single A Arizona Summer League hitters. What they need is immediate impact at the major league level. And even if it's not necessarily that, maybe things like you saw with Michael Busch, guys that just don't have an opportunity but are very highly regarded. They're ready to go, at least to give a shot to if you do your work and advanced scouting and believe in the guy. But this team needs help at the major league level, Brendan. Trading people for a bunch of teenagers again, that's not the timeline that this team is on. And so whatever they do at this deadline, my only ask is just that they are focused, as I said, on putting themselves in a better position to go forward. I don't expect them, this team right now, the 2024 Chicago Cubs, need too much. They need too much. If guys are not going to perform the way they need to perform, and we've talked about this, when Cody Bellinger comes back, he needs to be better, closer to what he was last year. That's what they're paying him to do. Dansby Swanson has been atrocious at the plate. He needs to be better. Things like that. The results you've gotten from Morel, et cetera, et cetera. If those things turned around, then sure, you could approach the deadline differently. But we're going on several months of that not being consistent, and you can't rely on it. Can they go out at the deadline and require a middle-of-the-order bat and immediate bullpen help? It's asking a lot, and I don't think that they should give up the assets to do that. But you can make moves that, as I said, help position you for this offseason and for the 2025 Chicago Cubs without selling out even from this roster. It's just about moving stuff around. But as we keep saying, when you are pushing up against the luxury tax, in fighting for last place, inconsistent, disappointing, etc., in a very similar position that you were last year, you need to start looking at every part of this roster and saying, is this money better served elsewhere? Are we better served trying to find a different option for this particular position? Because right now you have an awful lot kind of locked up. This guy's getting paid this much. He's going to play at this position every day. You don't have a ton of flexibility. And so you either need to be getting players who fit into that plan for next year and going forward, or giving yourself the flexibility to go out and make aggressive moves. And I don't know what those moves are at this moment in this offseason. I don't know that I have the confidence in Jed Hoyer to pull them off, but you have to use this deadline to be productive. I don't expect it to overhaul the 2024 Chicago Cubs because that doesn't make a lot of sense. You'd have to give up a lot to do that, and it doesn't seem worth it. But you can still have a productive trade deadline, Brendan.
I'm curious, beyond Taillon, who else would be made available? The way that I've been going back and forth in my brain thinking about this is, should the Cubs be extreme now or wait until there's more information in August and September? And when I say extreme, I'm talking about even considering moving guys, including, this is extreme, but like Morel, or considering crazy moves where you're exchanging high ceiling guys with volatility, like even trading Busch, like really extreme level changes, or just wait until you get all the information at hand with Morel at third base, a full season of Busch, see how guys' stamina progresses, like Justin Steele's stamina, Taillon's stamina, and then make a more informed decisions when not just a handful of teams are at play at the deadline, but 29 other teams are trying to improve. That's going to be the delicate balance. With Taillon projected 2 more years, an ERA, depends on which system, 4 to 4.5. He's on pace right now for over 2 wins. He's lived up to his contract. $17 million per year equals about almost 2 WAR, and he's on pace for over 2 WAR. It's just that now with a year and a half, to your point, of having guys not reach their ceilings, there's a lot of guys who make similar money who are not reaching their ceilings. And I think deep down, even though Taillon's making that money to equate an average starting pitcher, deep down, I do think the Cubs front office projected him to be better than what he's being paid for, as they did for everyone else across the diamond, including Seiya, Happ, and so on. It's just those guys have not taken that next step to be better than what they've been projected.
Yeah. Well, and I do think this trade deadline, maybe it doesn't represent the full possibility, Brendan, but something we've talked about a lot. Like, look, it's tough to have the confidence that this front office and really this organization is going to make the play that lands Juan Soto this offseason. A lot of teams are going to be interested. And what reason do we have to believe at this moment that they are going to put down the biggest and best offer? We really have none, frankly. So that means if you want to get better, and I know you were tweeting about this earlier as it relates to the offense, if you want to find a star, there's only so many ways to do that. If you are not going to be the team that is willing to write the contract and make the offer that is necessary to get those guys, which at this point we can just go through countless off seasons, and they're doing that. Not to say that they don't sign any free agents. We talk about how great a signing Shota Imanaga was, but there were stars out there and you didn't get them. Shohei in Juan Soto, Bryce Harper several years ago, yada, yada. We don't have to relitigate every one. But if we don't have the confidence that that's how they're going to address that problem, the options become twofold. You either develop them, which at the moment you don't have those players. Michael Busch looks like an excellent player, someone you can slot in at first base or DH or a different position, whatever you want to do. But his offense looks very nice. You've given him a huge opportunity. He's taken it. He's run with it. He's an everyday player for you. Amazing. He's not a star. He's not that top elite 1% difference maker talent. So if you're not developing them in the immediacy, you have to get creative and you have to think about trading for one and using your big pile of prospects to make the major league team better. And so that's why I kind of start to look at this deadline and think about this offseason and say, all right, like you're going to have to get creative and maneuver the major league talent you have and this top ranked farm system that you have in order to have some immediate impact. Because if we're flashing forward even to this offseason, Brendan, that would then be another season of probably not making the playoffs. I don't know. Another one of that. So now it's been 7 years since you've won a playoff game. It's been 6 since you appeared in a playoff game. I don't count 2020 for the millionth time. Another where you're falling short of expectations or selling at the deadline, this, that, and the other. You got to have some movement. You can't go into another season with more of these questions. And if 9 out of 10 of these random things hit, then we'll be a good team. You're going to have to be creative in how you figure out how to put a better team on paper when you're heading into the season. And it may start here at this deadline if you have the opportunity to maneuver some of these things that are already on your roster.
And to some respect, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Sure.
We do need to see how the next week plays out, but it represents the state of this roster where you're still in that no man's wait and see game. To your point though, what's interesting about this state of the Cubs is it's not crazy to think they can turn it over pretty fast. A lot of the guys on this roster are quality players who are producing. And I imagine
you're getting really nice seasons out of some of these guys.
And I imagine other teams would want those players, which means the Cubs could turn over pretty fast. One of the risk, if you want to call it that, with Jed was he accepted variance with these guys, but the variance, generally speaking, was somewhat shrunken because they had a high floor. Taillon's a good example. The floor is quite high, but the high ceiling, the super high ceiling, may not have been that high. Other front offices do the complete opposite, where they go super risky and they accept a ton of variance, ton of high ceiling guys, but the floor is also really low. And if they hit that floor, well, then it ushers in a complete rebuild. The Cubs shouldn't have to do that. If they enter another massive rebuild, then injuries and crazy performances happen. There is a possibility where they have this current roster. Yes, we have a limited ceiling now with all this information, but they can still turn over these guys. And then the question becomes, well, how risky do you want to be? Do you want to spend $300-400 million and accept some of the lower floor to reach the higher ceiling? And I think at this point, we want to do that.
I just want them to win. I just want them to win consistently.
To win.
Yeah. I mean, I got to be honest with you, Brendan. Like now, kind of pulling back, we've looked at a lot of the specifics. Like this was a really disappointing weekend. And I wouldn't classify myself as someone who was back in or ready to buy at the deadline because of the stretch before the All-Star break. But there were worse positions to be in. And they were fortunate that the rest of the National League had kind of plodded along to this point. And after, you sweep the Orioles, you have a good stretch to finish and head into the All-Star break. And an opportunity to start coming out of the break, weekend series at home against a team just a couple games ahead of you. And for them to come out this flat, it was really disappointing. And again, some folks I'm sure have written this team off. They don't care, et cetera, et cetera. But like realistically, like quite literally, the opportunity was there. It's still there for them. But to watch them just, again, to this meager, weak offense was really disappointing this weekend. Like, again, whatever you think of this team and the value of their chances in terms of being the third wildcard team or whatever it is, it's still there. It still exists. And for them to come out this flat after the way they headed into the break was just disappointing if there was any way left to be disappointed by the 2024 Cubs.
That's how the sport works.
Yeah.
It's just how it works. The Cubs, at times in their glory years in 2015, 2016, they went through bad stretches. It ends up, crazy stuff happens for unexplained reasons. The Cubs, with this current crop, they have more of these rough valleys, and their rough valleys actually plateauing into a really, really big valley. That's just how this team is at this point. I do believe, though, if we're talking about getting crazy and still trying to win and make the playoffs even right now, I do believe, and I think sometimes I get some pushback, which I understand, but I do believe to be a little bit more risky with the 40-man maneuvering. I want to see Ballesteros up right now. I want to see these guys get pushed. I feel as if over the past 3 years, the process has been too slow with many prospects. In the past, it's been faster. One of the ideas that I took from even 2015 from Theo's front office was being aggressive with guys who are close to ready. Kyle Schwarber was an example. Kyle Schwarber was called up in 2015 in June in Cleveland, which a year and a half later, he would go on to win the World Series in that stadium. Called up in June of 2015. Theo said, Schwarber's going to be up, and then we're going to send him back down. It was a predetermined quick stint with the big league team, then back to Iowa. I would like the Cubs to replicate that to some respect. I think if we talk about the emotional stuff, which we do value and we want to see maybe some of the emotion from the manager and call strikes, I think there's value in promoting these guys and leveraging that emotional burst. I think with PCA as an example, calling him up last year was good. It exposed him. He made adjustments to Dustin Kelly. Calling him up earlier this year due to defensive necessities with Bellinger and Tauchman down also let him develop faster unexpectedly. But that process has been going, I think, to be expected at a good pace. But if you want to win now, the current group of guys, contrasting them with Ballesteros' immediate output, they're within range of projections.
Yeah.
There was a moment, Miles Mastroboni in the 8th inning on Saturday, which I get he's been playing good third base, but there was a moment with the bases loaded, and I'm thinking, man, we have like clearly better bats in AAA. I get the catching stuff. I get the 40-man maneuvering stuff. It's complicated, but it's undeniable that Ballesteros' bat provides a better potential than Mastroboni. And so it's those types of situations where I would like the Cubs to find solutions to get creative with the 40-man, get creative with personnel, and replicate in some respect what was working so well in 2015, where they were able to call up Schwarber for a week and then send him back down without sacrificing major spots.
Yeah, and look, I know you mentioned this, but like obviously dealing with the 40 man, dealing with other things, it's not always as simple as just swapping guys out. But like you look at the Cubs lineup on Sunday, you look the 5 through 9 positions. You've got Morel with a 686 OPS, Talkman, who's just coming back from injury, but has not had a good weekend to start coming back from injury. 711 OPS, Dansby with a brutal 627 OPS, Tomas Nido 542 OPS. In the game on Sunday, he was pinch hit for by Mastroboni, who has a 511 OPS, and then replaced by Amaya, who has a 581 OPS. And then PCA, who of course is very young, and you want him to get this experience, but when you're struggling to score runs, now finishing your lineup with a 546 OPS, I mean, that's brutal, Brendan. And that's 5 through 9, and that is with a 1 through 4 that have all been pretty good this season, but none of them are great.
Yeah.
Highest OPS in your top 4 is 817 with Michael Busch. Like, it's pretty easy to see like what the problem is. So I hear you. Like, it's, again, you have to maneuver some of these things. There's more to consider than just, hey, this guy's hitting, call him up. But your lineup is brutal. You have plenty of guys that are not hitting. And if you're playing for your season for the next week and a half, which, again, it's not up to me. I don't know what their plan is. I don't know how close they need to be to make certain moves or how far back they need to be to kind of throw their hands up and say, hey, it's over. But you have any number of people in this lineup that you can look at and say, they don't need to be out there every day. Like, if we're trying to win, they don't need to be out there every day.
And
if you're punting and you're saying, screw it, different conversation. Then it's development. But you're looking at this going, this lineup is brutal. Like, try anything.
It's that, but then also developmental as well. I'm fundamentally inclined to think this. I break things for a living. I think fundamentally, when you break things, it exposes different ways and different creative processes to fix it. And so in a AAA environment, when you're not facing 95 plus heat, the process to adjust naturally isn't as fast. With Ballesteros, he's making a lot of contact. He's slugging better. So my thinking is twofold. One is, yes, it gives the Cubs more bats in an offense that requires more bats, but also too, developmentally, it has potential to accelerate the development. That's why in July of 2025, we don't have to ask questions of, should he be sent back down? Because we already went through that process, Corey. And I believe even with PCA getting called up in September, that accelerated his development. You saw it from day one in spring training, that batting stance changes he made with Dustin Kelly. So again, it's an aggressive mindset for me, but I'm fundamentally, instinctively inclined to think like this, where you be aggressive and you risk breaking things and you risk exposing players. So
and you've seen it. I mean, there's any number of players you can look at over the years that don't become everyday players. They don't become
and that's
mainstays.
Fine. You rule them
right,
out.
But they or they just have a hot month for you, and it's helpful. You need it, A lot of people, have very strong opinions about him, but like 2021, like before that disastrous stretch, Patrick Wisdom was exactly this person. KB was hurt or he was subbing in, and he was just smacking homers.
Do you
and for a while,
he had like 11 home runs in like 5 weeks. It was nuts.
Right, and it's like they needed someone to perform that way. Again, they end up trading at the deadline, of course, very famously, but for a minute, that team was in a good position.
Yeah.
And they were kept afloat by something like that. Call up this guy, see what happens, whatever. It would be one thing if this lineup were performing and consistent, but you're still just losing close games, whatever it is. Like, that's not the case. This offense looks feeble, weak, just pathetic. I mean, the tweets that were drafted, they probably get deleted, but when they come back and win the game. But like, you could say any number of things about the way this offense performed this weekend prior to that 9th inning, and you can change pretty much anything in this lineup. There is basically nobody in this lineup that cannot sit one day a week or something like that, and half the lineup probably shouldn't be playing at all.
Well, you look at the Orioles could be a good example. I'm not in tune with the fine details of the Orioles, but they called up a 20-year-old Jackson Holiday, and he sucked. But it exposed him to areas he needs to improve in. You accelerate that development. Do the Orioles need Jackson Holiday? No. They could have very easily continued to use him in AAA and promote that development, but they were rather aggressive, and they broke Jackson Holiday, and now he needs to understand what he has to do to fix things. I want the Cubs to replicate those types of aggressive call-ups.
Well, and I see it in the chat too, expressing frustration with PCA and things like that, and that's one of the things that we talked about even coming into this season, without knowing his role. But that was one of the frustrations, was that you were accepting risk on guys like Michael Busch, Christopher Morel playing every day at third base, PCA coming in and starting. PCA is one of your top prospects. He's I think he recently turned 23. Like, you're going to have to be patient with him. The problem is that the offense in 2024 can't really afford that patience with several hitters in the lineup. So you're
He's
at
22,
the same
22.
22.
So
I gave him an
months.
extra year.
You
Yeah.
did.
Like,
Aging him.
you're trying to square development and current production, and to say this for the millionth time, without those stars, without Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman at the top of your lineup, you can't really afford it. It's either Morel is great at third base and killing it as your cleanup hitter, and PCA comes in and immediately adjusts and is the top prospect you wanted to be, or the offense probably isn't that good. And that's what we've gotten for the last 2.5 months.
Yeah. Well, with PCA, what was interesting about him is when he was called up, I think he surprised a lot of the coaches and how good he looked at the plate. And don't twist these words. He has a lot more room for improvement. But when I say good, it was the ability for him to correct what was flawed last season. And to some degree, what was flawed earlier on in the season. I said this multiple times, but AAA, 74% contact rate, comes up to the Cubs, 80% contact rate, above average. That was music to my ears, hearing the coaches talk so glowingly about his approach and seeing their results. Now, if you look at PCA, I have a graph here, by the way, to Edward. I'm not going to go an entire episode without showing a graph here, but if you look at PCA's whiff rates over the course of his time in the majors, you can see that when he was called up in May and through June, the whiff rate or swinging strike rate was under 10% just before he was demoted. Not demoted, but sent back down. And that was frustrating to me. I thought, man, PCA's making these dramatic, unexpected improvements with contact, and they just sent him back down. Gets called back up 10 days later, the whiffs have gone back up. Whereas he was a 10% swinging strike rate before his demotion, now he's around, in his past 100 plate appearances, a 20% rate. But that's going back down again. So you're seeing these adjustment phases. You're seeing the valley with him not striking out that much to starting to strike out more, and that's starting to go back down. So that's what I'm talking about. That can't be done in AAA. You can't replicate 100-mile-per-hour heat with weird release points from these Diamondback relievers in AAA. You just can't do it. So I would like to see the Cubs continue to do that, but it is a delicate balance because right now the Cubs have no sluggers. They don't have a bona fide cleanup or third hitter. So the risk of letting PCA do that is so enormous because that void should be filled with a legitimate offensive producer.
Yeah, well, and as our guy, Godfather Michael Collada says, the bullpen too. It's been better, and I'm glad to see some guys getting their opportunities, Hunter Biggie, Porter Hodge, etc. But you blew a ton of games, and unfortunately, that's why we're sitting here. It was nice to see on Sunday you got good stuff. I think you got 3 scoreless, hitless innings, just 1 walk from Hector Neris there in extra innings. From Mark Leiter Jr., Porter Hodge, and then Hector Neris. So nice to see, but of course, it's a work in progress. You still have Porter Hodge going out there and trying to continue getting this major league experience, make adjustments as teams learn a little more about him. Same as, Hunter Biggie. We saw that great first outing and then a bad second outing and things like that. So work in progress. It's going to be a little unstable. Julian Merriweather working his way back, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully you get some stabilization there. But, again, it was a concern all off season. It's been a concern all season. And it's one of those areas where you can't just expect them to be consistent and perform at a high level. You don't have the guys that you can necessarily do that. So I don't know. This is a weird, we've talked before, you and I, basically since we started talking about the Cubs together for several years, had nothing but good baseball teams. And sometimes they won the World Series, sometimes they lost in the NLCS, and sometimes they were frustrating. But we were talking about good teams and really just looking at, like, what are their fatal flaws? What is kind of going to be the thing that's going to ruin this season or things like that? This is a very unique position for us, as was starting the retool, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, with trading the core and stuff. But this is, I think, a weirder one just because we have not talked about a team that had kind of modest expectations, big payroll, and is underperforming even those modest expectations. And it does present a weird spot that they're in. And I read it every time in our YouTube chat. And I will repeat personally what I've said before. Mine nor Brendan's standard for the Chicago Cubs is being a third wild card team or winning 84 games. That is not what I set out to watch as a fan, as a season ticket holder. It's not what we want to talk about. We expect more of this team and of this organization. At the same time, I am only trying to speak in what they may or may not do as the front office, as I don't get to make the decisions, and neither does Brendan here. Probably for the best, I think, that we don't. I don't know. Maybe.
I could do a good job. I play those video games. My team's win World Series.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. I think I won a World Series in MLB The Show like 12 years ago. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, you have front office experience. You've won a World Series with the Rangers, with Jose Leclerc managing,
Loosely, yeah. But either way, as we sit here, they are 3.5 games out of a playoff spot. It is not a good situation, as you are behind the Giants, you're behind the Pirates, and all three of the Mets, Diamondbacks, and Padres are tied for that third and final spot. Then you're an extra game and a half behind the Cardinals, an extra 4 behind the Atlanta Braves. So it is not a good spot, but you're a few series from the deadline. We'll see what happens. Like I said, I'm not trying to pretend this is a good team. They're 5 games under 500. They've been this type of team for the majority of the season now, outside of
what happens.
A good stretch in April. But I mean, really though, Brendan, I feel like
that should be the story.
I feel like
we'll see what happens.
I feel like the YouTube chat likes to give me like a little shit for it, but like if they swept the Brewers, which of course I don't expect them to do, like what if they ended up a half game out of a playoff spot? Do you think that Jed in the front office, I'm asking you genuinely, like they're going to go trade half the team? I don't think that they're going to. It doesn't matter what I want them to do.
Well, there's millions of dollars at hand if they make the playoffs. You get to that playoff series, that wild card series, it's gate revenue, TV revenue, ad revenue.
Yeah.
You make more money. So
do I think they're going to go in and beat the Dodgers or the Phillies? Of course not.
Right.
I'm not arguing to chase the wild card spot.
And you have a front office who is vouching for their job security. Of course they want this. Come on.
If they take these 3 series, they go on a little heater here. Like I think if you're just assuming they're going to sell and give up on the season, I think you're wrong. Listen, doesn't mean I think it's a good idea.
If I'm Jed Hoyer, I'm walking around Wrigley in the front office with holy water. I'm praying because my job security is at hand, man. Yeah. I'm doing everything possible.
So, I don't know. All that is to say, again, disappointing series with the Diamondbacks. Whatever your feelings on the state of the team or what's worth chasing
I feel like
or
we
not
always
chasing.
say that. The Diamondbacks have ruined my life. I mean this in all
What was
seriousness.
the story last
They
year
have
too? You
ruined-
missed out.
Oh my! It goes back to
You
the
missed out by a
2000s.
game, and it was a similar story, Brennan. It's because you can't take care of business against the teams directly in front of you. Last year, it was
sick of the Diamondbacks.
you played the Diamondbacks in Arizona in September, and you lost that series, and you finished a game behind them while they went to the World Series. This year, same thing. We've talked about it. You've lost series to the Pirates, to the Giants, to the Padres, to the Diamondbacks, to the Mets, to the Reds, to the Cardinals, like to all of these teams. Congratulations on beating the White Sox and sweeping the Orioles. You're not competing for a playoff spot with them, and you keep losing to the teams that you are. So that's why we're here.
Cubs should trade for Jackson Holiday. That would be.
They
creative.
can't hit. Their bullpen blew 20 games in the first few months, and you can't beat any of the teams you're directly competing with. That's the 2024 Chicago Cubs.
Is this the most frustrating team you've ever followed?
Oof.
I mean, that could be an
I
entire
feel
hour
like that's
discussion.
hard to square.
What is your immediate answer to that question? Without
2004.
2004. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say 2004. This one's up there though.
Yeah.
This 2004 was rough, man. That late season collapse was brutal.
Yeah. But no, I mean, this one is up there in the sense that a lot of this was fairly easy to see coming. And we've said this before.
Yeah.
But for them to, right now, the top wild card team, first of all, the team in your division, 57-42. It's not like the Brewers are on some like insane pace. They're not going to win 110 games or anything like that. But the National League just not that good. Even at like relatively, it's a down year even for a team like the Dodgers, despite all their offseason moves. And to know the concerns coming into the season and still be sitting here thinking, well, they're inconsistent on offense. They need a star. They blew a bunch of close games. They lose a bunch of one-run games, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, it's so predictable. So predictable. Every podcast, blog, everybody was concerned about the same thing.
We should run the team, We're all so much
collectively.
Smarter. We're all so much smarter than Jed Hoyer, Corey.
But you know what I mean? It's like they're plagued by issues that were easy to see from a mile away, and here we are in July. It's the same discussion every day.
It goes back to the earlier point, though, where if you want to rationalize what the front office was thinking, I do believe there's logic in the failsafe. Because the failsafe is a high floor that you can turn over in trades. So you can trade Tyone, you can trade some of these contracts, you can trade Ian Happ if you want to, you can trade Suzuki if you want to, you can trade everyone on this team mostly and turn it over. Besides Dansby, that contract, not going to trade. But you can turn it over pretty fast. So I think there is some potential value in that. You never want to get to that point, but it's not like you're exhausting the team with 5+ years of $200 million contracts. These are 2-3 year contracts and $15-25 million. They're low risk and they're paying those guys for a reason. So that will be the interesting aspect. If Jed gets a chance to rectify the disappointing results from some of these signings.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that's what we have for you. We will be back next week to see where the Cubs find themselves. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. They could be 7 games out. They could be 1 game out. Who knows? That's the fun of the 2024 Chicago Cubs. But 3 with the Brewers to finish off this homestand off day Thursday, and then 3 in Kansas City, and that will get us close to the end of July. But Brendan and I will be back to talk about the week that was with the Brewers and the Royals next Sunday. As always, we appreciate you guys tuning in for the Sunday edition of the CHGO Cubs podcast. Cody, Luke, Ryan, back with you. Or Ryan will probably be at the ballpark, but Cody, Luke, tomorrow night, Monday night, for your Cubs Brewers post-game needs. Brendan and I will talk to you next Sunday. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.